Ladies and gents, welcome to the Shroom Light Podcast. Another episode. Last week we were talking about kingfish. This week we're back. Brack. I don't know where that came into my vocabulary, my vernacular there. Jeez, something's wrong with my brain right now. But anyway, I know what I want to be talking about, and that's brim fishing, specifically Hawkesbury Brim. I've got a guest today, Adam from Golden Owl Fishing, and he's going to be talking about just that I just mentioned. So Sydney fishing, more Sydney brim fishing. I know you guys absolutely love that. He also does a bit in the para. But for now, this one, I reckon this is the first one that we've done from the Hawkesbury system. So I'm pretty excited about that. A little bit about him before I get him to start speaking. He fishes, obviously, and chases brim and all sorts of estuary species. Also your freshwater targets like bass and such, predominantly in the Hawkesbury and the Parramatta River system. And he does this on land, kayak, but you'll also find him doing all sorts of other things because, fishing is quite broad. You can find him off the rocks, maybe chasing the odd pelagic, such as bonito. Anyway, I'm about to froth at the mouth, so let's get him on while I get that saliva off myself. So, Adam, welcome to the show.
Awesome, Shroom. Thanks for that. I couldn't have asked for a better intro, and thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I've been very excited since this one, like I said, is going to be the first time that we're talking about the Hawkesbury Brim. And I know the Hawkesbury system, in my eyes, is sort of like a really large and untapped river. And, that just gets the juices going, just thinking about, what sort of fishing opportunities are just outside the doorstep of the metropolitan Sydney areas, like your Georges River systems, your Parramatta River, Botany Bay, Sydney Harbour, that sort of area. You've got, this very wild and large river. But anyway, we're going to obviously slowly get into that. Let's just start off just asking you how, your fishing journey has been and how you got into fishing. Maybe just a little bit about your fishing background so that the viewers here tonight can sort of understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, so my earliest memories of fishing are probably about 6 years old. My mother used to take us to a holiday house up on Tuggerah Lakes. And we used to just sit out the back all day and just leave our soggy prawns in the water and just wait for brim to hit them. And yeah.
That's, I was just going to cut you off there. Geez, like soaking a prawn, that's got to be the quintessential way to get started in Australia fishing. It's like we throw prawns on the barbie, we throw prawns on the hook, and we try to catch some brim. So Tuggerah Lakes, were you chasing brim with your family back then?
Yeah, so we used to basically just sit out the back, walk back in like charcoal chickens, and we might even catch like 2 brim in a whole day, but we loved it. Just running sinker rigs with our swivels and our little long shanked hooks, and yeah, you couldn't beat it. To us, going up there that once a year, trying to get brim is something we look forward to all year round. Being an inner city guy, we didn't really have many opportunities to fish, or at least we didn't realize at that time that we had a lot of opportunities to fish locally.
That's a good point there. A lot of the thoughts about fishing pretty much involves, okay, if you're going to fish in Sydney, where you're traveling to this weekend, where you're going to drive to, because everyone thinks that the spots around Sydney are quote unquote fished out, or, it's a bit too metro. Oh, I guess metro is not the word, but it's a bit too urbanized. And, the opportunities just aren't there. But these days there are. But yeah, just carry on. I mean, you can tell I'm really excited about just talking fishing.
Yeah, 100%. So, yeah, as I said, we used to look forward to that time of year. And then later on, eventually found out that we could do it locally. But it wasn't up until about probably 4 years ago where I started jumping on YouTube, and I couldn't believe it. I could see guys like yourself and Windsor Bait and Tackle catching brim in the Parramatta River, just locally. And yeah, I've been hooked ever since then. I couldn't believe that people were pulling up things like Taylor, brim, trevally, jewfish right on my doorstep. And ever since then, I've been hooked. So yeah, that's the story.
That's something that I can totally understand, and same for the viewers as well. Now, yeah, Tuggerah Lakes. I know this is talking about the Hawkesbury River, fishing for brim, but if you had to summarize Tuggerah Lakes and your experiences with that system in just like a sentence, how would you describe it?
Vast would be, it's massive. There's a lot of stretches of river. There's obviously a lot of species in there, a lot of structure to work. And then there's just big open parts of river with no structure at all, just featureless.
Yep.
Obviously, you've got your mangroves up and down your left and right and some tree stumps and stuff like that, but you can go kilometers without seeing a house, a boat, or anything. It's just massive.
That's amazing. I like the thought of that. Just a pristine, well, it's not pristine, but it's much better than some of the systems we've got down here in terms of like the
100%.
amount of, like you said, just people I was going to say people growing along the river, but you know what I mean? Like there's just people situated with their properties, and you've got industry, you've got, a lot of boatcraft and people, and it sounds like it's just a bit tucked away, or at least a little bit harder to reach some of these areas.
Yeah, 100%.
When was the last time you were up that way?
I was up there 2 weeks ago on a Sunday, fishing Barara Creek on my kayak.
And how did that trip go?
Not too good, this one specifically. I think I got about 3 brim, which, it's not too bad. I've had worse sessions, but they were really few and far in between, and I was pulling up a lot of small tailor. There's a lot of tailor up and down that system at the moment, and not the good kind, the little pesky kind, and a ton of mullet. If you're into catching mullet for bait, there's literally carpet loads of mullet underneath you. So.
I just want to say that my experiences, at least this past couple of weeks, mirrors yours in terms of the fishing. It's been actually quite difficult chasing bream in Sydney. I mean, my viewers know that my last video, I literally like melted in the sun just trying to get a couple of fish. It was just that bad. But
I've been there.
But it's still so good to just get out there and have a go, and hopefully, obviously, we all improve with our experiences. And obviously, like I said, on this podcast, just talking about it, you can enjoy and find more avenues to improve and hopefully improve future success in those areas.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Let's move on a little bit, and let's move towards the Hawkesbury River and the brim fishing, so to speak. So you mentioned, was it Barara Creek? Jeez, my brain is like not in the right place right now. It's like the car's engine on the, what is it? The engine mounts are like rattling, and the engine's like flying outside the front of the car.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's just cut what I'm saying here, but say, how's Hawkesbury brim fishing in general for you?
Yeah, look, I really like it. Look, for me, one of the big parts of me probably going to that system a lot more than my local Par River, especially with the kayak. There's a lot less boat traffic. Those river cats in Parramatta River, they're just they're hell on wheels. Well, not wheels, but you know what I mean. They're just you're gonna get rocked around a lot in there if you're fishing past, say, 9 a.m. and it's just not much fun. And you've got all the weekend warriors as well. Whereas if you go out to the Hawkesbury, you can find long stretches of river with a depth of about 2 to 3 meters, and that's perfect for brim fishing. Obviously, flathead too, and whatever else. And a lot of those big boats can't get in there, so you don't have to worry about it. You can go out there for hours and sometimes not see a soul. I've had stretches of fishing out there where, I've seen maybe one other person in like 6 hours. So that's one of the reasons why I gravitate towards the Hawkesbury, and it's worth the drive for me, definitely.
Yeah, definitely worth a shoot, just the drive up north and just shoot up to that little section there. Or I guess the river's massive, but, you've got all these little nooks and crannies that you're just not going to find that much population or that much people being in the same vicinity. And I attest, I agree with that, that notion that the ferries are just one minute they're going left, next second they're going right, and then there's, the river, what is it? The ones that take the cars across the river as well. So you've got like sideways, left and right movement. And if you're on a kayak in the middle of all that,
they won't slow down for you, mate. They'll make sure that whitewash hits you. Trust me.
Yeah, and I guess like it's a different problem in the Georges where you've got jet skiers. It's a love-hate relationship. But I think as anglers, we sort of very wary in areas where jet skiers are doing donuts. But anyway, if you're a jet skier yourself, hopefully you just you enjoy the water and. Don't spool me. Don't run across my line.
If you're a jet ski and you're fishing, then you're in the cool club. Otherwise, no.
Yeah. All right. Actually, where am I going with this podcast? Let's talk about brim right now as a species and how you've been finding them over the years and how your understanding on them has developed. So obviously you started off chasing them on baits.
Hmm.
What sort of baits, and then why did you transition to lures?
Okay, easy. Okay, so when I started fishing with baits, eventually I got sick of the little pickers hitting my hook and then just not catching anything and not understanding why, not understanding that I was using, not a small enough hook or whatever, or just simply moving up and down the banks, etc. Eventually, when I did start jumping on YouTube, like most hobbies a lot of people get into, they'll jump on YouTube, not realize that they really like something, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden jump down a rabbit hole, and all of a sudden you're 3 hours into videos and you're like, wow, I really like this. You know what I mean? So look, for me, one of the main reasons I jumped onto lure fishing, A, I was sick of having smelly fingers, and B, I couldn't believe that you could catch amazing fish on plastic lures. Looking at the lures and then going, wow, you can fool a fish into basically eating a plastic thing.
Yep.
That was intriguing to me. So
Yeah, I had the same intrigue as you just spoke there. That how could you get something that's inanimate and artificial, and obviously to human eyes, you would never fall for it. How could you trick something macroscopic, like a
yeah,
fully
exactly.
fledged fish? And, the first time that I actually got a bite, I'm not even saying that I caught a fish. I said the first time I used a soft plastic and I felt a tug on the end of the line and that was a fish, that just blew my head, like blew my brain. It's just,
Yeah,
what was that? It was like that was a drug hit basically. And sort of why I think like a lot of the viewers here, I mean, everyone could probably understand that feeling that you probably started off a little bit skeptical, or
yep.
you knew that it could be done, but you just never thought that, oh, it wouldn't happen to me, but I'll give it a go. Maybe one day I might get lucky. And then that first bite, and it's just a tug,
Yep.
and it just sets you off. Your
Yeah,
imagination just runs
100%.
wild.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Probably because for me, look, it was only about 4 years ago where I really started properly lure fishing and nothing else. And I
Yeah.
can relate to that. I think I probably screamed out something like, it works, or something like that. And then probably looked around embarrassed. But yeah, I can definitely relate to that feeling. The first fish I got, I think, was a flathead, and it was on a paddle tail. And ever since then, I've been hooked. I probably got nothing but flathead for a long time. I was fishing quite heavy, not
Yep.
realizing that brim do like a lighter presentation. But eventually I got the hang of it, and I eventually moved on to brim and other species, obviously.
Yeah, like when you said that you let out a yelp or a scream, like, yeah, this works. I think I've done that like I don't know how many times across the last several years,
Yeah.
but it definitely was a time when I caught my first fish, and for me it was a brim. My first fish was a 30 centimeter brim on a little paddle tail,
Oh, it was meant to be.
and I think my first 50 fish were all brim as well. I didn't realize why I wasn't catching flathead, but it was just the areas that I was fishing and the way that I was targeting them that I could only catch brim. And I think it was only after the 50th fish that I caught a flathead, and then I gave out another like yelp in the river, like, like this fish is bigger than a brim. It's like that's all I cared about. It was probably like 30 centimeters or 35, but it was a big fish in my eyes because, at least on lure, it was like I achieved something.
Oh, 100%.
And then obviously after that, when you catch your first like jewfish, and that one, everyone's seen videos of people on, Facebook, like literally like screaming like,
Oh, yeah. Man, I'm guilty of that too. I've definitely seen
yeah.
it.
Do you remember what the first brim capture was and the exact lure that worked for you?
Ooh, that's a tough one. If I had to guess, I would say it was a grub. But again, I used to fish really heavy when I started, not understanding the whole lighter presentation thing and finesse. I think my first setup was probably about 8 pound, and I was probably
Right.
fishing like a 1/8 G head. And yeah, look, when I brought it up, it was probably only about a 20 centimeter brim or something. But just realizing that I could do it, because when I first went out on the river, that was my target species. I wanted brim. I didn't want flathead. Don't get me wrong. I was happy when I got one up. But catching my target species, the brim, even if it was a 20 centimeter, just knowing that you could get more, that's what got me hooked.
Yeah, must say that someone's joy just depends on what they really want to catch. Like a lot of people said to me, "Oh, not a lot of people. Let's just go back many, many years ago, and my friends that I was like, telling them about this sort of thing, that they just think that, hey, why would you want to flat it? You get so many of them, you're doing all right. Just get the brim." And I said, yeah, but it's like I want to start ticking off some boxes here. I want to start getting some new species. I want to start getting some more different ways to challenge myself, and I think that's sort of how a lot of anglers these days take up lure fishing, are sort of seeing it as a way to you broaden your horizons. You want to try different techniques, different lures, different areas. One way, of course, is to pretty much try to break PBs or tick off species off a bucket list, so to speak. Anyway, speaking about a bucket list, is there anything that you'd like to catch that you haven't caught before?
Yeah, look, for me, it's probably kingfish. I fish light, basically almost all of the time. I do have a couple of heavy setups, but I very rarely use them. I've been busted by kingfish, quite a lot, and, it's pretty frustrating. The thing with me is as well, every time I go out and specifically look for them, they're just not around, and the only time I seem to get hits is when I'm on my 6 to sort of 10-pound leader setups, and it's just no match for them. So I'm probably Sydney's worst kingfish angler, admittedly, but eventually I'll get there. And like I said, I do have some heavier setups. It's just a matter of me putting in the hours. And like any species, if I research them enough and put in enough hours, I will get them. It's just a matter of putting in the hours, like I said.
Yeah, I just had a wicked idea on how to sort of like visualize this sort of thing. Like kingfish, to me, it's a species where they show their presence and you have your chances, but a lot of those chances will result in lost fish. It's sort of like playing a skill tester. You go to the arcade and the ones where you got the light moving left and right. You try to line up the lights to the very top to get the iPod or the iPad or whatever it is. Those ones?
Yep.
It's sort of like that. You get to the top and then that last block, it just never quite lines up. And that's the same thing with kingfish. You'll see them, you'll hook them, and then at the last second, you'll lose them due to some crazy run or a snag or whatever, tangled lines. It's just the nature of them. You get chances, but hey, you'll lose plenty more than you catch. And interesting how you said you hook them on the light line. In Sydney, especially in the Parramatta River, you're going to find that that's generally the case. They're a little bit wise, up in the rivers, and they will not hit a lure or even a bait if the leader can be a little bit heavy at times.
Yeah.
They'll have a go if you're throwing a little sugar pen or a little brim plastic in the snag and it's on 4 pounds, 6 pounds. They'll have a go. But otherwise, yeah, they'll always get you, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I've met a few anglers, and they basically tell me I've never caught a jewfish. Oh, they're so hard and blah blah blah. And I'm like, jewfish aren't hard. Kingfish are hard. Like I find kingfish way more elusive and harder to actually land than jewfish. Don't get me wrong, I haven't caught a lot of jewfish, but pound for pound fighters, man, you can't beat the way a kingfish pulls your line off the reel, in my opinion, anyway. And the way that they
that's true. That's
and
true.
the way that they just go straight down and look for that structure, no other fish that I've ever hooked onto does that. It's like they know exactly where to run you into. If there's a wharf pylon or if there's a rock directly below them, they're going to smash their head directly into that and purposely try to bust you off. So, yeah, it is quite difficult on that 6 pound.
Yeah, two entirely different beasts that that you're mentioning there, and everyone finds a certain style or a certain species harder than others just based on their tendencies of where they're fishing, how they're approaching it. But like you said, yeah, kingfish do more so than not. They're gonna pull a lot longer than a jewfish, at least stamina wise. They're just made for continual swimming, really, and the harder you go, the harder they go. And most of the time you won't see too many people pulling in a kingfish, just a bit of evidence, really. Just you won't see too many kingfish being pulled in on its side like a brim would. And obviously even jewfish do come on their side as well. Once they get tired, they're floating up on the surface. Your kingfish, they're there to the last they're fighting to the last tooth and nail. Like that's sort of how I see it.
Yep.
But yeah, I think let's put some respect on the jewfish's name. That species is just another level to target as well. It's got its own challenges and definitely very tough to land as well. But I think that it just depends on your experiences. But anatomy-wise, they've got this big paddle tail, and so they're more of an ambush sort of like hit, and so their first hit is going to be incredible.
Yeah.
It'll just like make you think what is going on with that first run. They can hit harder than anything, but yeah, kingfish I think with the stamina definitely comes through.
Yeah, definitely not throwing shade at the jewfish. They're definitely a mythical beast.
That's right. Yeah. All right. Let's carry on and let's talk a little bit about brim. Brim is another mythical beast, so to speak. Let's just start off and say, is there any brim that you've caught that you sort of like it's stuck in your memory bank?
Yeah, definitely. So one of my PB, I guess, or my favorite captures is I was out in the Hawkesbury and I was throwing blades. It was probably in that transitional period, probably in the next couple of months, so autumnish, and so I was throwing blades and I kept hooking up to small pinkies and I couldn't find any brim. There was a lot of small pinkies around. I probably got about 10. And then I got sick of it, so I moved. And then as I moved sort of towards a bay, I guess sort of a sandy inlet, I kept throwing my ZX, and I think my second cast on the opposite side, I hooked onto something good and my drag started screaming a bit. And I pulled it in, and as I got it to the kayak, it just went straight down and my reel just went zzz. And I go, I've got a Jew. I go, surely this is a Jew. Because until that time, I didn't understand that a brim could actually make your reel scream like that. And so, I was probably in about 7 meters of water and it just went straight down and I kept pulling it up and I expected to see obviously this really lengthy silver slab. And I did see a big silver slab, but it wasn't lengthy. It was just girthy. And I remember looking at it going, oh, this is my PB for sure. I still have goosebumps thinking about it now. And eventually, so I got it up in the net and I looked at it and I go, this is my best brim. And anyway, so I tried to put my hand around it. And when you get a 40 plus brim, you try to put your hand around it and you realize this is like, how can I describe it? It's like putting your hand around a brick almost. They're not so much lengthy, but they're girthy. They're almost like a brick. You know what I mean? And so when you go to put your hand around it, you're like, whoa, you got to stick your fingers underneath it. And look, even talking about it now, it's, when you've got a 40 plus model, it's good. They're not always lengthy, but they're just slabby. And, so that's my best, I guess, brim story now. And, part of it as well for me, again, when you're on the Hawkesbury, you rarely see a single person. So even catching that brim, I think I looked around and there was maybe one other boat around, and it's kind of a special moment when you're out there by yourself and you bring up a good fish. You know what I mean? It's like it's meant to be. It was just you and that fish. You know what I mean? I don't want to get too philosophical, but it was a good feeling.
And you can scream freely as well. No one's going to hear you.
Well.
Yeah. But how interesting is that? How you said that when you firstly just go and grab that fish, like what you're doing is you're trying to grab underneath where the chin is, and then you're like, wait, hang on, my fingers are supposed to be closer together. Yeah. Why are they so spread apart? And then you turn the fish's head towards you, and you realize that is a monster. You realize that jaw on that fish, and then the eyes and the nose. Straight away it needs to be measured and it's going to be some sort of PB. And that moment when you realize that, it just, like you said, they're not tall or anything. They're not long, but they grow tall. Like once they get past like the mid 30s, they start growing taller. They get, I don't know, like wider and taller and thicker. And it's hard to describe how big they look. Every centimeter, they're just much, much bigger than the previous class of fish.
That's definitely true. A 42 to a 43, you'll notice it as soon as you pull it out of the water.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you said you caught it on a blade. Do you remember what sort of blade and technique you were using at that time?
Yep. So I'm actually looking forward to the coming winter. I do really well personally on brim in the winter. So it was a ZX35, and you can never have enough of them in your tackle box, in my opinion. In the black and the red, you can't go past it.
Yeah. That's right. I guess EcoGear ZX35 is, I guess, a staple to a lot of tournament anglers. And yeah, in this case, it's definitely lived up to its reputation as being a tournament-winning lure.
Mhm.
I wish they were a bit cheaper though, Adam. Those lures.
Yeah, definitely. Look, if you know where to look online, you can probably save a few bucks, and that's the case with most lures. But yeah, look, I agree with you. The good thing about the ZXs though, they don't have dual trebles. They've just got those little single hooks on them, so they are quite a bit more snag resistant. And even
Yep.
if you do get them snagged, if you do the old bow and arrow trick, because those hooks, when they're hooked into the rock, they've got string on them, so they'll go down and slingshot off. So it's a lot easier, in my opinion, to get them off than it is a blade,
Yeah.
a standard blade with trebles.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, let's take this podcast towards the lure direction right now. So that is obviously a very good lure to use in the Hawkesbury.
Mhm.
What are some other lures that you like to use and throw around the area? And we'll probably get into some of the areas that are worth looking at in terms of the structure of the Hawkesbury after this as well. Oh,
So if I'm approaching, I guess you would call it a bay, with a big sand flat, and there's a lot of those in the Hawkesbury, I'll definitely have a splash prawn rigged up. If I'm after whiting, well, we're not talking about whiting, but if I'm after whiting, I'll put on a sugar pen. But for brim specifically, I'll chuck on a splash prawn. I like the splash prawn because you can work it really slow.
yep.
Double pops, triple pops, and then stop. Most of the time, I won't leave it pause for too long. I'm quite impatient like that. I'll just keep popping it until I see a wake or a boil behind it, and then I'll let it stop. I typically like to cone shape an area, and then if nothing's followed it, I'll keep moving, keep drifting, etc. until I find where they're sitting. Once I've found where they're sitting, I'll just keep throwing past where they're sitting, and then
Yep.
drag that lure past them until eventually I see another boil up yeah, I'll see them approach
You
it.
know, you see some sort of like
Yeah.
evidence of fish following or
Mhm.
looking a bit interested, you know, those waves and boils
Mhm.
making themselves clear that you know that they're in the area and they may be like moving across the flats, like you said. I
Mhm.
guess.
Yeah, and especially on those flats in the Hawkesbury as well. Not all of them, but a lot of them will be quite clear, especially if you're blessed with not a lot of rain. So if you're wearing polarized sunnies, you will be able to see those shadows underneath them. Polarized sunnies are definitely very important for
Yep.
surface fishing. If you can, try to get polarized glasses that match the color of the water. So there are parts of the Hawkesbury that are, sort of a greeny brown sort of tinge. So if you can get lenses that are that color, great. And there's also parts of it that are quite blue. So if you've got lenses that match that color, then do that. You don't have to do that, but they
Yep.
say that it does help. And yeah, as I was saying, look, if you can see them sitting underneath it, as you've probably heard many times, slow it right down. Literally just let it sit there. If they're not committing and they're backed off, you can always just reel it up, try again, or throw a hard body back there like a diver, because they're around. They might not necessarily commit to that top water bite.
Yeah, that makes sense. Interestingly, most people that have come on the podcast haven't talked about lens color. I know lens color is a big deal if you go out and you sort of like look at what's on for sale, and then you've got silver lenses, green lenses, blue lenses, brown ones, and it's, you know, you got something for every sort of situation. You vehemently have found that it makes a huge difference to your fishing.
It does make a difference. I didn't believe it when I first said it. I recently lost a pair of bluish green. Actually, they were probably more green on a trip up to Norton's Basin, and
Yep.
they were lucky. They weren't expensive. They were hawkers, but those ones in the estuaries, I could definitely see a lot more under the surface. Since
Yep.
then, I've got a pair of Oakleys, which are like a purple tinge, and I'm telling you, my visibility isn't nowhere as good as those $40 inexpensive sunglasses. So it definitely does make a difference. I'm not saying that you can't see anything. You can, but there's a difference between the color and the color of the water.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because I fall for some of that, you know, that sort of
Marketing.
like edge. Yeah, I guess marketing. It's a bit of an edge if you think that, oh, okay, it's actually going to help me see a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just due to the brand which you favor. You might pick a certain brand because A, they look good, that's me, which is, probably not the best way to select, fishing sunglasses. You want to pick, I guess, also not just on how it looks on you, but, the purpose that you're using it for. Which is sort of why I just went with green. It's sort of like a general purpose. If you're up the river in brown water, if you're down in the, the really heavy salt, maybe if you're even offshore in a pinch, it's going to be pretty good in most situations.
Yeah, definitely.
But if you're going up, like you said, like if you're going up towards like the clear brown flats, early morning, you're trying to cast these sugar pens or splash prawns in your case, as you said you preferred, then having the cheaper sunglasses, which is more fit for the job, you prefer that over the expensive Oakleys, which tells me everything about, like, that makes a huge difference in that case.
Oh, 100%. Look, if I can find a cheaper option of anything that will work better and still feel quality, I'll definitely go for the cheaper option every time. So yeah, 100%. If you can find a cheap pair of, not too cheap, not servo jobs. Some of those probably aren't even really polarized. But look, a brand name, polarized pair of sunglasses. At the end of the day, if you've only got $50 to spare, then make do with that. I'm all for saving money at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's right. I think at the end of the day, sunglasses is also there to protect your eyes. The servo sunglasses, they fall within the Australian standards, so they will protect you from the harsh UV, the UVB, the UVC. They've got like a rating, and I haven't seen anything which really falls beneath that sort of rating. When you buy it, you'll know that it's got a tag on it, and I think that's obviously the most important. But then after that, it's about fishing edge, fishing performance, getting that extra bit, and that's about spotting fish, especially like you said, like spotting them on the flats. Now, let's move on and I want to talk a little bit about the lures. Any specific color that you prefer on the splash prawn? Like, I'm assuming it's the 70 millimeter size. Obviously, like, in general, that's the best size for brim from that lure.
Yeah, I guess, sorry, this is the camera. I guess the crystals, I go for sort of the more natural colors. That's not showing up very well. But yeah, the more sort of natural colors. So this one's just like a crystal, sort of with a red on the bottom. And I've got the other one that's sort of stripy as well. As I said, any of my hard bodies in general, I don't really go for anything that's like bright highlights or anything like that. I'm not a US bass fisherman. I'm not going to go like crazy, weird, out there colors. So I'll generally pick something that's, that looks quite natural. For me, in hard bodies, the ever popular Suji pattern will almost always be my go-to. So yeah.
Yeah, what do you think about stripes on the lures versus no stripes? Because you had one there that didn't have stripes, and you've got another one that has. Do you have a preference between the two for any situation? I mean, if you don't, it's, sometimes it's just like you like the way that it looks.
I think with the surface hit, more than anything, it's probably the action. But that being said, if you really want to match the hatch, and I know a lot of people do, then I probably would go for the crystal transparent looking one, because at the end of the day, that's what a prawn is. It's semi-transparent. So I would probably gravitate towards that. If I had to choose out of the two, I would gravitate towards the transparent one without the stripes.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, some prawns do have stripes, but I'm just thinking that the stripes is definitely more towards scared bait fish. Like a lot of fish, when they, like, especially if you bring it up, like even a brim, you'll see, like, just for a fraction of a second, it's got that vertical, that vertical banding. You see it on the luderick as well. You see it on a bunch of species. Once you bring them up, for that fraction of a second, it's like they're trying to camouflage or they're scared. And I think that that's sort of like what the impression of some of the colorations and patterns on these lures are trying to project. It's a scared bait fish on the top, or a scared prawn. Come and eat me, come and have a go on my splash prawn and find my trebles.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I never looked at it that way. Yeah, that's a good point with the stripes. You're right. Fish in a sign of dominance or aggression, they'll often change their colors. And the same thing when they're in fear and fleeing, they'll change their colors. So that's a really good point.
And about the technique, you prefer 1 or 2 pops, and you sort of don't really pause it too long. I mean, we've sort of touched on this.
I'm very impatient in general. I like to keep moving. I find it hard to sit still, which is probably why I fish for long periods of time. I like being
Yep.
out of the water for long periods. Generally, if I'm taking the kayak out, it's for a good solid 6 hour session. So that being said, I do like to keep them moving. I know that's probably counterintuitive for brim, but as I'm keeping it moving, I'm looking out for that movement and then I'll slow it down. So I'm essentially scanning the area, trying to bring them up to the surface, and
Yep.
only then I will slow it down. If I'm just sitting there going pop, pop, and then just letting it sit there, it just feels like I'm just doing nothing. It's a bit boring to me, so.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on toward the next lure type or next lure that you'd like to use and the sort of, terrain that you might find it in. So, like the Hawkesbury, definitely very wild and very long, very deep in a lot of sections, heaps of current. What's another sort of like common habitat zone that you'll find and another effective lure?
Okay, so a lot of the Hawkesbury will just have rocky edges on the side, and then every, I don't know, let's just say 10, 20 meters, if you're lucky, you'll find a tree stump. But aside from that, unless you've got a sounder, that's literally all you're seeing. So recently in the shallows, I've been throwing a lot of plastics. And
Yep.
so I guess one of the lures we'll talk about is a creature bait. So it's the OSP Do Live Crawl. I do use some other creature baits as well, but the Do Live Crawl I find to be quite effective. Another one is the Demiki Monster Miki. The thing I like about those creature baits is when you're throwing them in really shallow water up towards those rocky edges, all you really need to do is just let them sink and let them do their job. Because if you think about what one of those little critters will do, whether it's a prawn, crayfish or whatever, it's generally going to be coming out of a hole in a rock and it's probably just going to be sitting there scoping the area for a while. So when I'm throwing that towards the rocks, I'm literally just letting it drop, sink, and I'm just watching that line. I'm waiting for that tick on the line. Typically it's semi-slack. Once I see that tick in the line, or I feel it, sometimes you just get stumped straight away. But once I feel that tick, I'm waiting for that, and you can't beat a soft plastic hit. Typically it'll grab it and then I'll just reef that rod back. And there's nothing like it. And I know you like that too. I've watched your videos, and that'll typically make the brim panic with that really big hook set, and you'll get that first big run, and that's when the adrenaline spike kicks in. And then typically, if you're around a lot of tree branches and stuff like that, probably a bit of panic sets in too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's basically what I'm doing. I'm just working the edges. There's nothing too scientific about it. If I can find features, that's what I'm doing. In places like Barara, a lot of the Hawkesbury, you will find a lot of private properties with pontoons, and they're ideal for brim, especially on the high tide, I find. Low tide, you might find there's not much water to work, so it can be a bit tricky. So if there's pontoons or boats, admittedly, I'm not the best boat hole fisherman. I prefer to chuck at the back of pontoons, under the bridges, under the walkways. If sometimes they're a bit tricky because people have usually got a lot of ropes and nets and just crap under those walkways, so they're snag magnets. They can be. So typically what I'll do, I'll look for the shade, especially if the sun's up high. It can make your job a bit easier. The brim, as you know, they're not going to sit out in that sunny open water. They're going to head for that shade, not just because it's cool or anything like that, or because they like shade. They're typically doing it because they don't want to be seen by predators from up above or below. Obviously there's a big predator below them. They can see that silhouette above them. So it's like a cheat code. When that sun's up high, you're aiming for that shadow under those bridges or behind those pontoons. You're waiting for it to sink again, and you're basically just waiting to set that hook in and waiting for that drag to scream.
Yeah, sounds good. I liked a lot of that, everything there, especially when you said that you load straight into that beast. Now, using these lures, a lot of them sink with action, but a lot of them also don't have like a lot of action. Like the Monster Mickey has a lot of appendages, but I wouldn't say that it sort of has a very regular sort of flapping bits that rotate like the OSP. What is it? The Do Live Shrimp, you said? Was that the...
No, they have I use the Do Live Craw. I have used the
Do Live
Shrimp.
Craw. Yeah, Do Live Craw. That one, the claws, they go like this.
Yeah, there's
So they've
there's
got
the
a
do
lot of
live
action.
correct. They also have the do live shrimp, but it's only in a 3 inch. But yeah, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, I was just basically saying that. So you wait for these lures to sort of hit the bottom and you sort of recast them, or do you change your technique once they hit the bottom? Because, like I said, a lot of these lures, they may not have that inherent action inside of them. Like the Monster Mickey, certainly I wouldn't say it's a very strong action lure. In fact, I'm not even sure if it does have any sort of regularity in the way that it might pulsate or move on the drop.
Yeah, definitely. There's not much action to them when you compare them to something like a grub or a paddle tail. But that being said, I will throw them and wait for that hit on the drop. If I don't get hit on the drop, I'll still do my typical double or triple hops and
Yep.
again, wait for that hit. So it does work. They do have, I don't know if you can call it an action, but the arms and legs will flip around as it's sinking to the bottom. That being said, if you go too light, you're probably not going to get much action out of those arms and legs. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, this is a bit of a fun question. So, what sort of animal or critter do you think a Monster Mickey is trying to replicate there? Is it like a spider mixed with a scorpion, mixed with a cockroach, mixed? What do you think that lure actually is trying to mimic?
If you were going to compare it to something here in the Australian waters, you know those weird little looking, those water cockroach things that you see on rocks, and when you walk over to the rocks, they scamper? I don't even know what they're called. They're kind of like long. They look almost like a water millipede.
Yeah, I think I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'd compare it to something like that. I just call them water bugs. I don't know. But in Japan, look, I'm sure they're probably made to look like something. And over there, they have the chinu, which they call the sea brim. And there's a massive market of lures over there that are aimed at sea brim that essentially work on our yellowfin brim as well. At the end of the day, they're a subspecies. They like taking little critters like that. So yeah, they're perfect for our yellowfin.
And, the Do Live Crawl, another very well produced and researched lure from Japan. OSP, you can't knock OSP. All their offerings are just incredible quality and very, appropriately priced, I guess. Although I wish it was cheaper. But why that crawl in particular? There's a lot more crawl imitations in the Australian market as well.
Okay, so a couple reasons. Firstly, the price. You can find them a lot cheaper if you know where to look. Don't worry, local tackle suppliers. I'm not going to name these places online for you.
Ladies and gents, I think we got to go, infiltrate Adam's sources here.
Yeah,
no, I'm only kidding. Carry on.
Yeah. So look, a couple reasons. One being, if you can find any lure at a good price, I'm sure you would buy it. And then number two, I like trying new things. One of the big things for me with lure fishing or any other hobby that I've been in, I guess I get quite bored with using the same lure all the time. So I like to try new things. And that's why I have a lot of JDM tackle and I guess JDM lures and whatever. When I look on other markets from the other side of the world, I'm intrigued. And as I said, they're big into their chinu fishing over there. And you know that the Japanese put a lot of research into their lures. So typically what works over there, especially in the 2-inch and 3-inch size, will work on our species. So for me, it's something different, and I like trying new things, especially if they work as well as these do. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, they work on humans. I mean, if you haven't seen them before and you see them in the water, you'd 100% buy it straight away. Like if you see the action on some of these plastics, you would think, I've never seen a crawl actually do anything. You just sort of just sinks and its claws are up in the air. These ones actually gyrate like back and forth, and you wonder, my gosh, like how did they achieve this? And the Do Live shrimp, have you seen like the sides of little feelers?
They have those big antennas that come off the top as well. And did I mention that they're all? Sorry for raising my voice. I get a bit excited.
That's all right. Yeah, carry on.
But did I mention they also come pre-scented as well? So that's another good selling point. You won't find a lot of plastics of that quality that come pre-scented. So,
but yeah, basically just to sum up a long story short, incredible moving parts and little appendages that you thought just were there for visual presentation. It's not true. They actually move and they actually vibrate. It's incredible. Anyway, let's talk about another lure. another sort of habitat that you'll find in Hawkesbury. We might make this the last sort of lure, and then we'll move on from here.
So I guess we'll move on to a hard body next. If I'm fishing typically 1 meter to 3 meters of water, let's say, it doesn't have to be a mud flat. It could just be like a rocky bed or something like that. I use something like a OSP dunk or a Daiwa spike.
Right.
Now they're a deep diver, and the reason why I'll use them is because they'll cover quite a large body of water. Even if they're in that shallow water, that bib is rustling up the dirt, sand, or whatever. And the good thing about it is that middle treble is guarded.
Yep.
And so I guess it's less snag prone than a lot of mid to shallow divers that I've used. So I generally will use an OSP dunk or a Daiwa spike if I'm gonna use as a diver, because I can cover a large water column, and even in the shallow water it works well, in the deep water it works well as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say with that lure there, yeah, that one, pretty amazing. Like, what? That's an interesting color as well. I was about to say I haven't really seen people throw that color. Which one's that?
I go matte black for a lot of things. With a lot of lures, like as I said, Suji, a lot of the time I'll gravitate towards. I'm sure most people will, but I also really like matte black. If I'm fishing in dirty water, Para, Hawkesbury, doesn't matter where, if it's that dark green, almost brown color,
Yep.
most of the time I'll use a black lure. The thought process being, their vision a lot of the time isn't very good, and if it's got that bold black silhouette, in my opinion, you're more likely to get the hit. I'm not a scientist. I don't know what they're seeing at the end of the day, but look, it's paid dividends for me many times before. So if they do make a hard body in a matte black variant, a lot of the time, I'll go for that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I might have to brush up on my knowledge about that, but fish definitely can see color. But they see the world very differently to humans. Anatomically, if you look at their eyeball, okay, I probably should use a different word, but if you look inside their eyes and you look inside their, just the general structure of the retina, you'll see that they do have, we've got two types of photoreceptor cells called cones, and rods. Now, I believe the cones are the color receiving, receptors, and there are like 3 different types. You got your red, blue, green, and that's how you sort of see the world. And then you've got the rods, which are seeing in black and white. And so the fact that they have that means that they can recognize color, just like our own eyes. But what is interesting is that in a human's eyes, we have like a higher proportion of the cones versus the rods. And so we see pretty good in the color, especially with the daylight up. But what happens when, you turn off the lights at night and you look around your room, everything's just pretty much black or gray and maybe white. They're the only, it's just shades of, gray. I hate saying that phrase these days, for obvious reasons. But basically, we have a high proportion of cones versus rods, and obviously that would be vice versa for fish. So that means their world is more dominated by shades of black and white.
Yep.
And so that's why color, although it matters, may not matter nearly as much. And also factor in the fact that water absorbs light. Sunlight, you lose certain wavelengths as you go deeper, that it becomes a less intense or vibrant world that they're seeing. And so, yeah, they're definitely seeing contrast more so than colors. And yeah, like, just to sort of wrap this part up, a lot of people do like using black for that strong silhouette. And it's a very safe color, in my opinion, for a lot of lures. It's not too out there. You have confidence in it as well as an angler. And confidence is definitely one of the biggest things when it comes to fishing, because if you don't feel confident that this bright pink lure is going to help you catch a fish, you're just not going to do the right action on it. You're going to be impatient and you probably won't catch a fish. But if you fish a lure that you swear by and you believe in, you're probably going to end up succeeding at some stage and hooking on.
Yeah, 100%. Confidence definitely a big thing. It might even be just one of those things where you caught a really good fish on a certain color, and ever since then it's just been planted in your brain. I have to buy this color when I see it on the shelf. So look, at the end of the day, I don't know that definitely the science behind it, but for me, it's one of the go-to colors.
Yeah,
And while we're on that
fantastic.
subject, what's your favorite color? What's your go-to color in the hard
Yeah.
bodies?
I guess like green and red. They're my two favorite colors for
Yeah, wow.
for a lot of reasons. I think green sort of suits a lot of the conditions in the mid sections of the para
And red
and the
even.
Georges. Yeah, I like a bit of red. I like a bit of red because if it's down deep, it sort of looks black, like black fleck, and red sort of, it's a color of blood as well. So
Mm.
color of like,
I just always thought that that fish or invertebrates that are red are trying to put off like a danger signal, so most fish won't touch them when they're putting off that red danger signal. But hey, look, if it works at the end of the day, why not use it?
yeah, that's true. And also, red is sort of, I think red is sort of like a deep water color. Like a lot of the deeper
Good point.
species are red, like snapper and
Mm,
like I've got all these red fish in my head right now, like red emperor.
mm,
Jeez, I could probably find a few other things, red gurnard, if
yeah, yeah.
just a lot of red stuff. So that's really deep, offshore sort of fishing. But yeah, I sort of like natural colors. Green is rather natural.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you think about the color blue?
Um, yeah, it's probably one of the colors that I never buy.
It's a natural.
Actually,
I've always
actually,
thought about it.
Actually, no. I actually did, and it's a
Yeah.
bent minnow. It was one of the Japanese only colors, and guess what? I've never caught a single fish on it, so that's probably why I never buy them anymore.
Yeah, it's a weird one. Like I
Mm.
always thought that everyone says natural colors, and I never really hear blue. I mean, if you're offshore and you're using hard bodies and you want to mimic you're throwing a pilchard out as a
Mm.
stick bait. I've seen a lot of blue there.
Yeah.
But when it comes to blue, small blue hard bodies like maybe a dunk or a spike or a atomic, like actual blue, I have
Mhm.
not really seen that. Maybe as an accent
Yeah.
to the lure. And as a soft plastic, is there such thing as like a blue, sort of like true blue color, sky blue? I don't think so. There probably is, but
there-
like a lot
yeah,
of people don't prefer it. It's
not
an
for the
interesting one.
estuaries. You wouldn't think so, anyway. Maybe
Yeah,
that
so
can be one
that's
of your, maybe that can be one of your next videos. Trying weird color lures, see if they work.
yeah, and the weirdest one happens to be the most natural, the color of the sky.
Yeah.
That's a weird thought, but yeah, ladies and gents, if you have any thoughts on that, that's an interesting one. Have a think about that one.
Mm.
Blue lures, it's just blue plastics in particular.
I'm
Always
sure
thought
someone.
about it as a
I'm sure
natural.
someone will jump in the comments and say they've had luck with it.
Yeah. Blue squid jigs, I have like plenty of blue squid jigs.
Yeah.
That's another sort of color that's actually quite good for squid fishing. But in terms of like a blue Z-Man grub or a blue,
Mhm.
Biotough wriggler, not really, I'd say. But yeah, anyway, we'll move on from there. Let's talk about something else, and let's talk about conditions for chasing brim on the Hawkesbury. Now, like I said, it can be very windy out
Oh
towards,
yeah.
like I can think of the place, but I just can't remember the name. But like once you go east of, say, Brooklyn Bridge, that sort of, it's
Oh
just
yeah.
open and it's wide, and if you're on a small boat, you'll know about it if the wind's
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, look, it's brutal. Typically, I'll leave and probably have my kayak in the water by sort of 5:30, 6 a.m. most times. And if I jump on those weather apps the night before, if it's going to tell me that it's 15-kilometer winds at that time, then I
Yep.
already know once I'm on the water, it's 20, 25 plus. So I typically won't even go on a kayak. That's not a fun time. I can tell you now. So condition wise, definitely I'm not looking for a lot of wind. Yeah. Now as far as sunny, cloudy, rainy,
Yeah, that's right. So we've got like, like you said, just the actual weather conditions themselves. We've got tide. We can talk about rainfall, barometric pressure.
Generally, if I'm out on my kayak on the Hawkesbury, that's like 90% of the time. Tide to me doesn't matter. I'll just head out anyway. If I was land-based, it would probably be a different story, but I'll just head out and make do with what I've got. Find most times I'll see either side of the tide. As I said, if I'm going to load up, prepare all night the night before, I'm not going out in my kayak for 2 hours. It's probably going to have a solid 6-hour session. So it doesn't really matter to me about tide. Moon phase, I don't pay attention to at all. Now, that being said, I've fished on either side of the full moon many times, and for whatever reason, it's super hard to get a brim bite for me. That might just be me personally on the Hawkesbury River, but I've found a day within the full moon or the day after a full moon, I've just found it really tough. I don't know if there's anything to that or not, but that's just me personally for brim. Maybe they move to deeper water. Maybe they move out to the mouth. Maybe they're full from the night before. I have no idea. I'm not really the expert on moon phases, but that being said, look, I don't let it affect me too much. As long as it's not raining and too windy, I'm just going to head out. The old saying goes, a bad day's fishing is better than a bad day's work. So
better than a good day's work, I think it is. Like you're even doing some good work at.
I really butchered that, didn't I?
Yeah. Anyway, I would say that everyone that comes on any sort of podcast, they always say that they don't know anything about the moon phase and all that sort of stuff. I think that's the beauty of fishing. No one really knows for sure. We're sort of trying to connect dots of like too many variables, but the thing is that's the beauty of fishing. It's just that might actually be true. Whatever your experiences are, I believe it. It's just whatever's happened to you, you can back it up with your own empirical, evidence, and you'd probably go out the next time that it's one day before and one day after the full moon and probably have a pretty bad session, like relatively. And so it just makes sense. And I think that's very important to just basically believe that whatever your experiences are, there's always merit. And even if there is a reason for that, fishing is not an exact science as a lot of people would like to believe. There are certain things you can do to improve your chances and the probability of coming tight to a fish, but they are in the water somewhere. They have to eat at some part of the day. And so they don't just magically teleport out of the system and then teleport back, like 2 days after the full, hey, well, they're all back with the big brim. No, I mean, that's the thing. I always think to myself that sometimes when I go out and I fish a really bad set of conditions and I do really well, I would have thought to myself that if I didn't go out and fish and I didn't even try, then I would have just like reinforced what I thought were bad conditions.
Yeah.
So I always just still have a go. I mean, it's a weird way of thinking about it sometimes where you think that you got to do this and it's probably going to be this, but you know that if you didn't go, you would have thought otherwise. I don't know if that sort of makes sense. Like, it doesn't just apply to fishing. It applies to everything in life.
There's definitely a randomizer element to it. At the end of the day, you can never predict what's going to happen, moon phase, tide, whatever. Yeah, that's the beauty of it, I guess.
How do you find the rain affects the Hawkesbury system?
Oh, okay. Upriver, I find it really tough a lot of the time, especially when you're getting into those creek systems in the really shallow water. There's a lot of mountains and hills, and that runoff of fresh will often go right down into those creeks and into that shallower water. So if there's a lot of rain, which, as you know, last year and even the year before, there was heaps, within 2 weeks, if there wasn't 2 weeks straight of no rain, I wouldn't bother. Now, that being said, if you're on a boat and you can go out to the deeper water where the salinity on the bottom is a lot more stable, that's a different story. There's always exceptions to the rule, but just with me on the kayak, when I'm fishing typically 3 to 5 meters of water, I find it very tough when there's been a lot of rain.
Would you say that even if we have a little bit of rain up that way, that it would change the complexion a lot? Or do you think that, because I'm thinking about, for example, that if we have a little bit of rain, let's say 1 to 5 millimeter, that would be considered not enough rain to put you off trying to go out for a fish. For a lot of people, 1 to 5, not so bad. Once you're talking 5 to 10, you start watching the radar a bit and start thinking that, hang on, I could get caught out here with some, proper rain. Like, I'm just thinking about the catchment, that sort of thing, all the feeder streams and the feeder creeks. And this is just a gut feeling that I'm asking. And there's obviously, we don't fully know how it, unless you're there and you know how it flows, you're not going to know exactly how it captures, the rainfall. But if you had 1 to 5, do you think it changes the river enough or a lot or not really?
I do. I think it changes the upper reaches a lot. The water gets very sedimenty and dark. and you won't see a lot of action. A lot of the time when you fish there, when there's no rain at all, if you're out there for an hour and you're looking at the edges, you're going to see some boil ups. You're going to see some sort of signs of fish activity. I've been out there after heavy rains and the surface is just dead because there's a giant layer of fresh on the top and those fish don't want to be up there. Now, I'm not saying there's no fish there, but I'm just saying they're not near the upper 1 sort of meter, and chances are they're probably moving out to that deeper water.
Now we're at the tail end of summer right now. Summer generally a very good time to be chasing brim. Now, like you said, this year, last year, we've had terrible amounts of rain. You can blame it on La Nina. So we've been through, I think, 3 consecutive La Nina cycles.
Yeah.
I think we're finally out of the very last one, and I think we're in neutral conditions right now, and I think the scientists have predicted that we should be heading towards an El Nino. So that would mean dry conditions, which are, very good for fishing. If you don't your brown water, if you don't like flushing the system out every 2 weeks, which is what we've been doing and getting floods, then El Nino is actually quite good. I mean, it's bad in other ways, but in terms of fishing, it's not bad. You're not going to get your day rained out. The rivers are probably going to be green all the way up through to Liverpool Weir and the Georges, and it's going to be nice. It's going to be quite salty. So, but how would you say someone that wants to chase brim, how should they approach it heading into autumn now? Or maybe even the end of summer. We still got a couple of weeks, I'd say.
Look, in summer, the good thing is if you're, I guess, anywhere in Sydney and you've got a bunch of sand flats around you right now, right now is prime time to throw top water. If you've got a large expanse, the size of a football field, go wade into there and go chuck top water while you can, because you've probably only got another month or so, maybe even 2 months, to throw it around while those brim are still active on that top water bite. And you'll regret it if you don't, because you're going to go another 6 to 8 month stretch without being able to do it. So I would say that's definitely my advice. Sorry, what was the question again?
Well, basically, the way that you answered it was very good answering the question. But I was just talking about seasons and heading into certain periods, what the approach should be, that's all.
So as we head out of summer into those transitional months, I personally will move into blades. I like to go deeper. Getting hit on a blade is a lot of fun. It can be a lot like a soft plastic. When they hit it hard a lot of the time. So yeah, I'll definitely be moving to blades. Sorry.
Yep.
You can still use your hard bodies, but a lot of the time as we head into those transitional months, the autumn, and then eventually into winter, those brim are looking for more stable temperatures. If you go to an aquarium or if you've ever owned a goldfish, you'll know that when you bring them home, you need to sit them in a bag for a long time because fish don't do well with fast temperature changes. And the same thing when winter hits, they'll want to sit in that more stable temperature typically, which in theory is deep water. And that's when I'll be pulling out my blades.
Yeah, and like you said, we'll be pulling out the ZX35s in black and red.
Oh, yeah.
All right, awesome. Let's quickly talk a bit about gear. Yep. So obviously, anything special or different in the way that you set up your gear for this sort of fishing?
Okay, so my first rod is my Atomic Arrows, which is a brim crank. And then I've got that paired up with a Shimano Nasi 1000. That's got 6-pound Varavas 8-strand on it. This is quite a slow taper, so it's very bendy. I use this specifically for my hard bodies. With a slow taper rod, when you've got those small size 14 trebles on them, you want a lot of give in the rod, so you're not pulling hooks. I'm sure if you've used a fast action rod before and you've used those really small trebles, sometimes you pull hooks. So the reason why I have that set up is for that very reason, for hard bodies. So typically that's what I use for my hard bodies. That being said, look, I don't really like the way it casts because it's such a slow taper. if you're aiming for those precision casts from the kayak and you're trying to get right into a crack or a crevice, it can be quite tricky with those slow taper rods because they're very whippy. They'll just wobble around basically.
Yep.
So it can be a bit. I don't know if you own any slow taper rods, but I find it can be a bit hard to aim with them.
I did, but it ended up going in the drink at McMahon's Point. So, guys, if you find a Daiwa in feet 1 to 4 kilogram, you know it's mine. But anyway, I'm just kidding. If you find it, just keep it. It's probably long gone now.
Yeah, I remember when you lost that. I felt your pain, mate. Trust me. Okay, and the next one is my Shimano. The next one is my Shimano Zodius and my 2500 Vanford combo.
Yep.
Quite a popular combo. A lot of people will pair these up, obviously for aesthetic reasons as well. It's quite colourful with the red and black. Now, this is more of my all-rounder setup. I use this for my brim. It's spooled with 6-pound Varavas Max Power PE X8. They've got a 8-strand standard, and then they've got a Max Power brand.
Right.
And so I've got that spooled up with 6-pound. But the reason why I call it an all-rounder is because I also have a HG spool for it, which I keep with 10-pound, and I'll use that for my bass fishing. So I can just hot swap them, use one for brim, and if I want to go for bass, I've just got that extra grunt in the 10-pound. So I could just swap those spools out.
Yep.
And then on the heavier side, I've got my Shimano T-Curve Premium with my Stratic FL 2500. I love this setup. The Stratic FL is probably my favorite reel that I own in the 2500 size. This T-Curve Premium is a 2 to 5 kilo. For a lot of brim fishers, they might look at that and say it's a bit heavy, but I'm using it for my plastics, and a lot of the time I'm looking to rip these brim out of heavy structure, so I want that grunt and that extra fast taper, essentially, to rip those hooks in and pull them out fast.
Awesome, Adam. Look, I'm going to wrap up the podcast here. I think I could have gone on all night speaking to you about brim fishing, and I think you could have gone on just as long as well. So
probably.
I'd like to say thank you for coming on board and sharing your information about brim fishing, in particular Hawkesbury brim fishing. And I know a lot of the viewers, they're going to enjoy this podcast, and they might actually want to find out more about you. So, what are some of the socials that you have where they could find you? And also, if there's anyone that's been a part of your fishing journey that you'd like to thank, let's go through those people as well.
So you can catch me on YouTube at Golden Hour Fishing. I enjoy some video editing, so definitely if you haven't subscribed to me, go ahead and do so and throw me a like. I'd really appreciate it. It costs you nothing, and it helps me with the algorithm. And Instagram on golden_hour_fishing. I'm probably not the most active on that. But yeah, definitely hit me on that as well if you have any questions. Look, as far as thanks to people that helped me along the way, I'd probably say yourself and any other local fishing YouTubers, you guys definitely do a lot for the community, and I just want to let you know that we really appreciate it, and keep the content pumping.
Thanks for the kind words, Adam. And look, we're gonna have a good time listening to this one in the edit, especially for me as I go back over this one. Golden Hour Fishing, ladies and gents. That's him, Adam. And look, this is time that we're going to conclude the podcast. So this is Shroom for Shroom Live, signing out.